And now what I'm doing is I'm looking at the diagram that's on page 555 of the PMBoK. So they didn't do us any favours because they're explaining something to us on pages 18 and 19, and they haven't shown us the diagram that explains what's going on. They put that in at page 555. So it looks like this is going to come up here. So you don't need to go off to 555, but I'm just telling you where it is. But what it says is that early on in a phase, we spent time and effort doing chartering and stakeholder assessment. And once we have started to do some of that, we can do some planning. And notice time-wise that planning is overlapping initiating. And as we initiate, we know enough to plan, and as we plan, we know enough to execute, and as we execute, we know enough to monitor and control. So the executing that's going on in here will be the project manager going out and acquiring the team. So it won't be a lot of bricklaying or writing software. It won't be that bulk of activity that was technical work that's expensive and delivers the product to the customer. The executing in here is mostly the activity of the project manager in executing, which is about team development. And we'll close off at the end. So the question that I'd ask you is, if I draw that red line across the page as a time now line, how many process groups are active? Yeah, there's 4 process groups active there. So when we look at page 25, it looks as though at different times you're in different process groups, but actually at any one point in time, here we'd be in 4 process groups. If I move that red line to there, how many process groups are active now? Still 4. 3 of them are the same, but one of them stopped and one of them started. One of them's not really done very much yet, but it's started. So that red line is much more a domain view than it is a process group view. So that should allow us to understand now. Yeah, it's snowing. If we take the project life cycle view that we saw 2 slides ago, which is on page 18, starting, organising, carrying out and ending, and we map that into the process groups that are below, initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, control, closing, then what we ought to be able to see is that the amount of effort that's spent in the project across each of scope, quality, time, stakeholders, procurement, etc. is we have a lot of initiating at the beginning and some closing, and the result of that is the first draft of the charter. And then we go into planning and preparing. So we've had to close out one phase in order to start up a new phase, in which case we do some planning, in which case the output now is the project management plan. But it may be that we need to update the charter. It's not particularly likely, but it's possible. And then we go into executing against our project management plan, where we will produce deliverables, which will have been through the journey of being verified and accepted and transitioned, because remember that 4.6 was closed project or phase. And if this is just one delivery phase in, say, an agile project, we would repeat this executing the work in the next sprint, next release, in which case we may well be now meaningfully refreshing our charter and our project management plan in order to cycle this again and again and again, but eventually we'll close out the whole project. So where the final transition takes. So again, the whole of page 25 is within each of the project life cycles, and we have an overall perspective on the effort. But actually, if we were to look inside, we have a much more refined expression of the effort that's being expended across the project life cycle. And that chunk in the middle there, hopefully you can see my red dot, that chunk in the middle there may repeat multiple times, and then each repeat could be called a sprint and could last 2 weeks, or it could be a release and last 4 months, or it could be a project in a program and be lasting a very long time. Are we okay with that? Sort of? Okay. Because now I want to tell it to you again, but I need 3 dimensions to do that. So notice we've got page 18 up there. But what I've just been sharing with you is that we have a project life cycle, and that project life cycle has the starting, organising, carrying out and ending. And we have actually different degrees of the amount of initiating, or closing that we might be doing at different times. This is my best attempt to model the dynamics of what's going on. So here's initiating, and here's planning, and here's executing, and here's closing. And closing generally less than we'd need for, say, for executing, and there's probably less of it in the first chunk than there is in other chunks. And across that, we need to put the process groups. So the process groups are active within each of the life cycle stages. So we get the most initiating in initiating, and we get the least closing in initiating, but we get the most closing in closing, which hopefully doesn't confuse after the last diagram. But we then have to recognise that the 10 knowledge areas extend across all of that, and I really ought to have divided every single one of the cells up in here into 10, but I couldn't, because we've got every knowledge area in every process group of every life cycle phase. But I thought it got detailed enough at this point.
Yellow's no good colour.
No, I'm not sure why that is yellow. Actually, yes, I am. This grey should be a darker grey, because then it stands out better. And it is a nice dark grey on my laptop. It's that projector's projecting it brighter than it might otherwise have been. It's nice and crisp on my laptop, but you can't see that. And then the bit that we've also been looking at is to say, well, if each of the knowledge areas is full of processes, and a process is a set of tools and techniques that receives an input, generates an output that is then the input to the next tool and technique. So this is the picture, the context that we need to understand in order to be able to put in place what page 18 is telling us about the relationship between these things, and page 19, where it talks about project development life cycles. Now, the bit that page 19 tells us that I haven't attempted to fit into this page yet, the last line of the first paragraph says the phases may be sequential, iterative, or overlapping. All projects can be mapped to the generic life cycle. And then the next line of the next project life cycles can be predictive or adaptive, with one or more phases. And then the last bit, the development life cycle can be predictive, iterative, incremental, adaptive, or hybrid. So what it's saying to us is the project might work by being planned at the beginning, executed and closed. That's predictive. You go through it once. The project might be more adaptive, where you don't try and create the plan in detail at the beginning, and you update the plan as you go based on what's happening. And then the product may be developed iteratively, which means that you go through that sequence of events more than once. And it may be those iterative elements might add to the product, and thus we get incremental. So predictive is we say it in advance. Iterative is we go around the loop many times. And incremental is each time we go around the loop, we add a bit more content. So those phrases are not repeating each other, they're all trying to say different things. And the bullet points below explain a little bit more, but they say what I've just said to you. And then we get, then page 20 we get phases given names, some suggestion about what the attributes might be. But 21 we get phase gates. A phase gate is the place where performance and progress are compared to the business documents in order to decide whether or not to proceed. Described in the middle of the bullet points as a decision, go, no go. So a phase gate is where we compare status to baseline. That is to say, project achievement to business need, and we decide whether to continue or not.